says, read some lines. The stage manager hands me the script. I read the lines. I flub all the way through it. And he says, okay, take your jacket off. And I read some more lines with my jacket off. And he says, take your shirt off. And I'm beginning to get the message. He wants muscle.
The Western genre would be nothing without the legends of Lee Van Cleef and John Wayne. However, underneath all the glitz and glam of the masterpiece movies they starred in, there was a deep rivalry brewing. Behind the scenes of the movie, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, there was a rising tension between the two major film stars. The reason behind this tension has remained a mystery all these years. Finally, we know why Lee Van Cleef couldn't stand John Wayne. Curious? Come along as we unveil the details. Lee Van Cleef's career. Clarence Leroy Van Cleef Jr. is a name that resounds heavily in Western film and television. Lee Van Cleef has a reputation that precedes all great reputations. He was an American actor with over 170 film titles and television roles. He is best known for unforgettable titles such as The Good, The Bad, and The Ugly. Western film as we know it wouldn't be what it is today without the contributions of talented actors such as the great Lee Van Cleef. Born on the 9th of January, 1925 in Somerville, New Jersey, Lee Van Cleef began his journey in life as he served in the United States Navy during World War II. His noble call to serve earned him a Bronze Star. Little did he know that his life would soon take a different direction toward the acting world, earning him several awards, such as the Golden Boot Award for his contribution to the Western film genre. Lee Van Cleef's acting career is legendary in every aspect you can fathom. His career, which lasted over 5 decades, earned him his spot as one of the most popular and distinguished actors of his time. He was most known for his innately impressive ability to play a villainous role, so much so that it always left an unforgettable mark on everyone who witnessed his raw talent on screen. Lee Van Cleef was as sure as day a talented actor, and he also had his astonishingly striking looks to back it all up. His striking physical features and his talent for acting were the double whammy he needed to execute his roles flawlessly. To top it all off, his personal life story is one of strength through adversity that will inspire many people just as his career on screen has been able to. Who would have thought that the boy who grew up in a small town would make it big in Hollywood? While growing up, Lee Van Cleef learned everything he needed from his watchmaker father. He learned discipline as well as hard work. All of these things came in handy to prepare him for the life he eventually created for himself. His father had a huge impact on his life. He taught him everything he needed to know, from how to pay close attention to detail to the art of precision in everything he did. While Lee Van Cleef was serving in the U.S. Navy, he participated in combat and also had a role as a radio operator. No one can ever know what it feels like to have fought battles in World War II, except those like Van Cleef, who lived it in all its gory details. The details about his combat and wartime experiences are certainly bigger and more painful than anyone could ever imagine. However, those days might have shaped his experiences and influenced his acting career path. Who better to play parts of no-nonsense, antagonistic characters than someone who has been through the brunt of it in real life? After the war, Lee Van Cleef played in an amateur dance band. He then ventured into the world of acting in his hometown of Somerset, taking on roles in plays such as Our Little Town. His journey took a turn for the better as he entered Hollywood to try his hand at acting in the biggest entertainment industry in the world. Lee Van Cleef was a prominent American actor, but he didn't start that way immediately. He began by appearing in small roles, some of which were uncredited roles in films that portray military personnel or other typecast characters along those lines. His luck changed when he was noticed by a film producer named Stanley Kramer, who changed the entire trajectory of his life for the better. At this point, Lee Van Cleef's career began to attract fame and success. He made his screen debut in High Noon, playing Jack Colby, a non-speaking outlaw with a gravely twisted presence. This role led to his future of being typecast as a villain in almost every story, and his striking appearance didn't help in that department either. Each character he portrayed on screen had a certain aura that made him seem rough around the edges in a charming way. His demeanor as an outlaw is exactly what you would expect to see from a villain. This means he smashed every single role and embedded himself in every ruthless character he played. You can't talk about Lee Van Cleef without talking about film director Sergio Leone, who gave him his big shot in the industry. In 1965, Sergio Leone chose Van Cleef to play the main protagonist alongside Clint Eastwood in the film for a few dollars more. Sergio Leone didn't stop there. He gave Lee Van Cleef another opportunity to act alongside Clint Eastwood, but this time he was to play an antagonist. Lee Van Cleef soon became a major star thanks to his roles in Sergio Leone's films. He had built a solid reputation as a great actor whose ability to portray characters was as remarkable as it was. However, at the beginning of it all, he didn't like being typecast into villainous roles, and his budding career had also reached a standstill because of these typecasting issues. Lee Van Cleef's biggest break came in the 1966 film The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. He played the role of Angel Eyes in the film, and his portrayal was spot on in all the ways that make a good character. Sergio Leone directed the film, and Clint Eastwood played the part of the iconic man with no name. However, Lee Van Cleef's portrayal of the greedy mercenary stole the show. A little fun fact, Clint Eastwood came up with the name Angel Eyes while they were on the film set. Angel Eyes, as portrayed by Van Cleef, was the kind of character that left a long-lasting impression on everyone who watched the film. His ability to play a wide range of characters pushed him away from being typecast in the films he acted in. His on-screen presence is the immense talent people write about and still talk about, which is why he became a legend, especially because of his time as a Western actor. While he was mainly known for acting in Western films, Cleef was not confined to a box. He explored beyond this genre and began acting in action films and television. He continued to bag endless roles such as Escape, but pivoted into the action film genre to connect with the newer generation of fans. However, the question is, how is John Wayne connected to all these? What was his relationship with Lee Van Cleef, and why couldn't the latter stand him? Were they ever on a movie set together? Was there a feud between the two that many didn't know of? Remain at the edge of your seat as we unveil more details to answer these questions and more. Lee Van Cleef and John Wayne. Lee Van Cleef and John Wayne are two legends of the Western genre, but the thing about stars is that there's often not enough room for all to shine the same way. These two great actors have had their fair share of acting in many great film roles. In the same way, they've both contributed to the Western film industry through their talent and unique take on characters in the stories they tell. Just like Lee Van Cleef, John Wayne was an American actor who gained legendary status for acting in films of the Western and war genres. The start of his life didn't have the best outcome as he lost his football scholarship after a body surfing accident. However, things turned around for him when he went into the silver screen industry. The relationship between Lee Van Cleef and John Wayne isn't what you would expect it to be. As major stars of their time, there was an unspoken tension and animosity between them. There they were, two major stars with the utmost love for their profession, but couldn't get along. Their rivalry started as professional, but it has almost certainly grown into disdain for one another. There's nothing quite like a Hollywood feud to make on-screen drama seem a bit less interesting. And on this front, Lee Van Cleef and John Wayne were delivering the entertainment in real life and behind the scenes. Now you might wonder, what happened to ensure they did not get along? It's pretty simple. Their differences in personality, politics, and even work ethic were the contributing factors. The beginning of their rivalry can be traced to the film The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, directed by John Ford. According to Van Cleef, John Wayne was cast in this very film in 1962 at the behest of the studios. The director, John Ford, did not like this. To him, it was an intrusion on the part of the studio. This led to a certain amount of resentment on Ford's part, and he wasn't afraid to show it. He would relentlessly taunt Wayne during filming, setting the tone for something even bigger. The rivalry between Van Cleef and John Wayne existed separately from the studio's decision. It was mostly fueled by their opposing perspectives on how the American West should be portrayed in film. Van Cleef leaned more toward playing complex characters, while John Wayne liked to play heroic cowboy roles. This was a major difference between the two actors, because while Wayne preferred traditional roles, Van Cleef's ideas were not on the same plane. Van Cleef, known for his striking good looks and villainous roles in spaghetti westerns, was not John Wayne's biggest fan. They shared a love for Western filmmaking, but their acting styles were very different. This brings us to another major contributing factor to their long Hollywood feud. Van Cleef's disdain for John Wayne stemmed from another root, this time about their different acting styles. Van Cleef prided himself on being a method actor who never lost a chance to dive deeply into his role. It didn't matter how he always embodied each of his morally complex characters. In many of his films, John Wayne stayed in the lane of the same heroic and archetypal characters. John Wayne always took the traditional approach in terms of values, leaving little to no room for the complexity of the character. His archetype character would typically be the heroic cowboy who stood strong, silently, and unflappably. Van Cleef believed that this type of acting lacked a certain kind of depth. To Van Cleef, Wayne's typical roles symbolized Hollywood's ability to shine a light on certain superficial images without putting in the necessary details to make them well-rounded characters. To add fuel to the fire that is their fuel, they also had political differences, which further opened up the rift between them. John Wayne was known for his conservative views. He was an avid supporter of right-wing causes and American nationalism. John Wayne also played a leading role in advocating for traditional American values, which he was certain were under some threat. Like clockwork, Van Cleef's views didn't align with Wayne's. Lee Van Cleef was more reserved about his political views and leaned on a different side than John Wayne. Van Cleef leaned more toward the progressive side, as he was open to the 60s counterculture movement, which criticized American imperialism and advocated for civil rights and anti-war sentiments. Van Cleef found Wayne's political views problematic. He found John Wayne's support of militarism and conservatism to be illiberal and narrow in his worldview. Van Cleef found an interrelation between John Wayne's public persona and the character he played. It seemed that John Wayne's acting art imitated his real-life views. By playing the self-righteous cowboy with an inability to see beyond his belief system and into the bigger picture of the complex nature of the world, John Wayne's screen characters seemed to have much in common with his reality. Their political difference was another layer of tension and angst in the feud. It is clear now that Lee Van Cleef did not like John Wayne. And it was never because of one reason in particular. As though it couldn't get any worse, the cause for their tension was also attached to their fame. On the one hand, Van Cleef went through many struggles before his big break, while John Wayne achieved fame early on without many hassles and maintained his fame throughout his career. The big kicker is that Van Cleef always played the villain, which means he was always a step behind men like John Wayne, who played the heroes often. Who doesn't like the hero of the story? Absolutely no one. John Wayne was the American hero, while Van Cleef was the villain who was oftentimes more undervalued by audiences and fans. Fortunately for Van Cleef, he could still achieve long-standing success even while being typecast as a villain in Hollywood. When it comes down to it, Van Cleef begrudged how Hollywood kept stars like him in the villainous box, while stars like Wayne took up space, leaving a little less room for other stars to shine through. The causes of the feud between the two major stars were beyond the surface, and their opposing views caused clashes. On a more personal note, Van Cleef was also irked by their interactions away from the cameras. Van Cleef found John Wayne's personality overbearing on and off the set. As an introvert, Van Cleef often avoided social settings where John Wayne was present. Their personalities and views couldn't have been any farther apart. Plus, John Wayne was known for his penchant for being self-assured and getting things done his way in the industry. To Van Cleef, that was not his style of doing things, as he preferred to be more considerate. The infamous feud between Lee Van Cleef and John Wayne was the kind that could create tension that could be cut with a knife. The set of the film they shot together had ears, and it turns out that the tension was noticeable when the two stars interacted. Allegedly, John Wayne looked down on Lee Van Cleef's talent. He saw him as a character actor who excelled in villainous roles and lacked what it took to be the leading man. Who wouldn't be insulted by the mere implication of this thought? Van Cleef felt it, and more than anything, he believed that Wayne's success was because of luck and timing, and had nothing to do with talent. The rivalry between Van Cleef and John Wayne ultimately boils down to one theory. They both contended for the title of the biggest name in the Western genre. Now we know why Lee Van Cleef couldn't stand John Wayne. Animosity grew from their glaring differences. Lee Van Cleef was the kind of actor who preferred to portray more complex characters, and John Wayne was the kind of actor who went for the traditional Western world of storytelling. They were two sides of a coin that didn't see eye to eye on several things. Top that off with a clash of values, and you have yourself a Hollywood rivalry that supersedes all rivalries. Understanding why these two great actors couldn't get along is not rocket science. Lee Van Cleef and John Wayne represented opposite sides of the American Western dream. John Wayne represented the larger-than-life, often idealized American Western dream, while Van Cleef represented the complex and imperfect reality of the American Western dream. Their clash was inevitable, and even after all this time, we're still engrossed in why they had bad blood. Now we know why. Lee Van Cleef's personal life. Lee Van Cleef's personal life is as interesting and memorable as his professional life as an American actor. He has been through it all, the successes of life, as well as a lot of horrors. Lee Van Cleef took the bold step to get married young. His first marriage to Patsy Ruth Cayley in 1943 was a whirlwind. Not only was he young, but he was also trying to balance the start of his career and his marital life. Lee Van Cleef and Patsy Ruth Cayley shared 15 years as they raised their 3 children. While that seemed like the perfect marriage, no marriage is perfect. In their case, one challenge they faced was Van Cleef's regular absence due to his demanding job as a Hollywood actor. One could only imagine the toll distance can take on a marriage and the entire family. Unfortunately, they ended up getting a divorce, and their little family was forever changed. With the divorce and his career caught in a landslide, Lee Van Cleef was going through the motions. It was a difficult time for the actor, but that didn't stop him. He kept holding on. 2 years after his divorce, he married Joan Marjorie Drain. Their relationship brought in some well-needed good luck charm for Van Cleef. This era of his life was the blossoming era, because he had gone through a great standstill in the progress of his career due to a car accident. This era in his life was around the time he met Sergio Leone, who gave him a role in the iconic spaghetti western For a Few Dollars More. Now, after the accident and while being married to his second wife, everything was looking up, and he finally went from a supporting actor to Hollywood's very own leading man. Lee Van Cleef's second marriage came with a lifeline for his professional life, proving that you can truly have it all. He was on top of the world, and his image in the industry was right there with him. His second wife, Joan, was there with him as he broke into the spotlight. However, that lasted almost as long as his first marriage, and they divorced 14 years later. 2 years after they got a divorce, Lee Van Cleef moved on to marry Barbara Havalone. This was the marriage that lasted till death separated them. Van Cleef's third marriage was the stability he needed after the many ups and downs of his career and personal life. The devastatingly heartbreaking part of this is that just when things were getting more and more stable, Van Cleef's health began to deteriorate. Lee Van Cleef was a strong man to his core. Even with the heart problems he endured and the issues he had from his past injuries, he continued his work as an actor in the film industry. By the 80s, he had appeared in less prominent roles than during his prime years. He also had another accident while building a playhouse for his daughter. This incident led to the loss of the last joint of his right hand middle finger. Barbara Havalone stood by his side all through it, but Lee Van Cleef sadly passed away in 1989 from a heart attack in his home in California. This was the end of the couple's 13-year marriage. This was also the end of the road for Van Cleef's acting career and his life in the spotlight. Through it all, Lee Van Cleef had a great sense of values and morals. He was a devoted father, a great husband, and a dedicated and talented actor. His work in Hollywood will forever be etched in the history books of the film industry, and his role as a family man is something special that will live forever through his offspring. Unfortunately, John Wayne passed away on the 11th of June, 1979 due to stomach cancer, and Lee Van Cleef followed on the 16th of December, 1989 due to a heart attack. It's hard not to love Lee Van Cleef, but he did not like his rival John Wayne, and now we know why. Were you glad to know everything about this great Hollywood feud? What are your thoughts about Lee Van Cleef's life and struggles? Let us know in the comments. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Before you go, watch the other videos on your screen.